Today, let's take a look at the mind-bending, reality-shaking, what the hell just happened movie.
It would take some getting used to.
The film opens with a shot of a cloaked man carrying a suitcase and some sort of machine with him on his way to a mission. He goes down a flight of stairs and into a boiler room where he uncovers a planted bomb, hidden under a piece of cloth. The man unpacks his suitcase, which turns out to be a device used to contain an explosion, and gets right down to business. He carefully unscrews the bomb and tries to disarm it, but he notices a presence nearby. With just a few seconds left ticking on the clock, he quickly spins around to check his surroundings, just as the assailant shoots at him before disappearing. He turns back to the bomb, which now has 5 seconds remaining. He quickly disarms it, takes it off of the wall, and puts it into the containing device. But a few seconds too late. Just as the lid is about to close, the bomb explodes, sending him backward and severely burning his face. As he writhes in agony on the floor, he begins reaching for the device he was carrying and is helped by a mysterious, unseen person who nudges it towards his direction. The man inputs something before slamming it, and he is instantaneously brought to a moment in the future where he is wrapped completely in bandages and recovering. As he wakes up, he breathes heavily and angrily pushes away a cart carrying medical supplies. Honestly, I'd be pretty damn pissed too if my entire upper body was torched and turned to mush. Moments later, 2 men in suits present him with an award and congratulate him for serving honorably. The man, looking like a mummy wrapped completely in bandages, does not take his congratulations with a big smile on his face. He asks about the final order from the board and the status of the bomber. The 2 men answer him cryptically, saying that the bomber was no longer his problem and that he needs to rest. His final mission was very critical. He's tasked to take down what the press has called the Fizzle Bomber. This unknown bomber has been wreaking havoc all over with careful and deliberate attacks, and his grand plan was slowly coming into fruition. A recording made by the bandaged-up agent we were following earlier reveals that this Fizzle Bomber's grand plan was going to happen in March 1975, New York. Though he keeps changing the day, this massive event will level 10 blocks of New York and kill over 11,000 people.
This time, but this was only a small attack.
Earlier, the agent came close to stopping him, so close. A little while later, a doctor begins undressing his bandages, revealing a brand new face underneath. The doctor reassures him that soon his new face will be ready for his final mission. It would take some time getting used to, and the rest of the parts of his body will still need some time to heal. 7 years later, the agent starts a new recording and tells his past self that the order for his mission finally came through. He reminds his past self that each of his missions are important and bring him closer and closer to the final goal. As he's prepped by the men in suits from earlier, we begin to realize that this man isn't just any agent. He's a time-traveling agent sent to stop the Fizzle Bomber.
Look, I'm guessing you're not celebrating.
Later, on the 6th of November 1970, we see the time-traveling agent tending to a bar just as a mysterious person comes in and orders a drink. The person asks the agent, or rather the barkeep, to leave the bottle, to which he jokingly responds by making a joke that he seems like he isn't there to celebrate. The person does not take this well. Eventually though, as the barkeep continues to tend to the other customers, the strange customer begins making conversation, asking if he was new. He tells the person that he's been working a couple of weeks and it's been quiet in the area. The customer jokes if it's because of the Fizzle Bomber, and the barkeep jokingly agrees. The two make small talk in which the customer reveals that they're in fact the unmarried mother, the pen name they use to write best-selling confession stories. The barkeep shows the unmarried mother his copy of a magazine that has their work on it, and he asks them about how business was going. Though flattered, the unmarried mother questions why this random barkeep would read their work, because they don't exactly fit the demo, like at all. Because this guy writes for broken women who want to feel better and sad sob stories. The barkeep tells the unmarried mother not to be so hard on himself. He's read the work and he feels like they got a good handle of the woman angle. Oh man, if he only knew. The barkeep encourages the unmarried mother to tell their story. With that, the unmarried mother raises him a bet, 1 bottle for the best story he'll ever hear. The barkeep takes this on and raises the unmarried mother a bigger bottle. After a few quips, the unmarried mother budges and begins their story by saying the barkeep does a double take, thinking that the person he was speaking to was assigned male at birth. He apologizes and the unmarried mother firmly tells him not to interrupt the story. The story begins on September 13, 1945, when she was just a newborn, left on the doorsteps of an orphanage where she's given the name Jane. In the orphanage, she's taken care of along with a dozen more babies who had no past. But that was the one thing they had in common right from the beginning. Jane was always special. But she was also quite the difficult kid. In one particular incident in her childhood, she sees a mother and daughter across the street and decides to go to them. Along the way, however, she's almost hit by a car, and she lashes out by punching one of its headlamps before being escorted back inside the orphanage. The unmarried mother continues her story by saying that she never understood why her parents left her. She didn't know what she did so wrong that they had to abandon her. She later vowed that any kid she will ever have will have both a mom and a dad, which largely kept her away from sleeping around too. It kept her pure, according to her. Aside from that, growing up, she was also very aggressive, always picking fights and was always the strongest one in the bunch. She also excelled in school and became top of the class, but her peers never really liked her. She was never adopted, and she felt like she stood little chance of ever getting married because of her looks. She always saw herself as a freak and hated what she saw in the mirror. Years later, when she became a grown woman, a man named Mr. Robertson visits the orphanage to let her know that they're looking to train women to become astronauts, a concept that surprises her despite her interest in space travel. He agrees, but tells her that they are looking for young women who excel in the fields of mathematics and science. On top of having strong physical abilities, he gives her a flyer to Space Corp and she goes to the interview. There, she judges all the other women looking to be sent to space, basically just being a big hater and dunking on everyone else who wasn't special like her. Strangely enough though, during her interview, she's asked if she's ever been with a man, to which she answers that she hasn't. In present time, the unmarried mother elaborates that they made sure that the women never got pregnant during the time of their training and the girls were sure to return married by the end of their voyage. In the flashbacks, we see that the girls were also subjected to strenuous training, which Jane greatly excelled in, even scoring the highest numbers the company has ever seen in examinations. During an assessment of her mental health, she's again asked how much she thinks of sex, to which she admits that she thinks about it often. Despite her initial confusion about the idea, she also elaborates that she often feels that something is out of balance with her, and that none of the other girls were like her. The psychologist tries to reassure her that she simply needs to give them some time and they would come around eventually. Soon after, however, she gets into a brawl with one of the other girls where she knocks her to the ground. When they're both sent to the clinic, Mr. Robertson observes and is approached by a doctor who hands him a report of a more detailed examination of her, which shows a result that would disqualify Jane. Mr. Robertson urges the doctor not to tell her yet and let him handle this case. Because of the fight, Jane is sent away, but not before Mr. Robertson assures her that he was going to do everything in his power to get her re-enlisted again. Of course, she couldn't rely on that pipe dream, so outside of the program, she worked as a mother's helper. In between chores, it was then she discovered confession stories. In between the monotony of her everyday life, it was a great way she could pass the time. After a long day at work and reading confession stories, she also went back to school. She even took charm classes to convince the Board of Appeals for the space program that she was working on her decorum. One day after class, while it was raining, she bumps into a man and asks him if he was lost. He tells her that he was just waiting for someone, to which she responds with a quote by Abraham Lincoln. To her surprise, the man repeats the second half of the quote, "The good things that happen to those who wait are those left behind by those who hustle." She was instantly charmed by the unseen man and the two hit it off. She thought he was handsome and rich and treated her with the most kindness she had ever experienced before. He told her that he'd take care of her, and she believed him and fell in love. All of her previous rules about being pure and keeping away from sex fell out the window.
She's a healthy little girl.
This didn't last long, however. One day he just sat her down, asked her to wait, but he never came back for her. A heartbroken Jane just took it all in and convinced herself that she wasn't really in love with him. It was all just a fling. Soon after, Mr. Robertson comes to visit her in the house where she works and tells her that Space Corp was merely a front for finding and recruiting people who are special in order to serve in a confidential mission that involves shaping wrongdoings. He explains that they're looking for people like herself. No family, no husband, no children, no past, and no ties to the future, on top of having exceptional physical and mental capabilities. Jane never really understood what the job was, however, but she knew it would change her life for the better. But the bright future went down the drain when she learned she was pregnant. She never saw Mr. Robertson again. As if things couldn't get any worse for poor old Jane, she later finds out something strange about her body. When she gave birth via C-section, she woke up and found out from her doctor that her baby girl is healthy and okay. But this good news is immediately followed by a life-shattering revelation. He explains that when he successfully removed the baby, he saw that Jane had 2 full sets of both male and female reproductive organs. Jane was intersex. However, the excessive bleeding caused by the C-section pushed him to reconstruct Jane. He had to remove his uterus and ovaries, leaving her with a male urinary tract, and she would need to go through more surgeries to transition into a man. Although initially troubled, she took in the news and moved forward, with the realization that at one point she would have to change her name. She gives her daughter the name Jane and swore to do right by her, but none of it mattered because
I was always afraid to look in the mirror and see the person.
2 weeks later, her baby was snatched from the nursery, never to be found again. She tried looking for her and the culprit, but she never found either of them. Our girl simply cannot catch a break. After going through the very traumatic loss of a child, soon after, she was preoccupied with her new mission.
Every time I looked at my new appearance, I was reminded.
Transitioning. For 11 months, she stayed in the hospital and had 3 major operations to medically become a man. After months of not looking in the mirror, when she finally looked, there was no trace of the person she, or rather he, used to be. However, every time that he would see his reflection, he was always reminded of the man who ruined his life. With his new life as a man, however, there were a lot more things to learn. So when it came down to it, he still applied for Space Corp again, but this time as an astronaut. But they had his records already and he was deemed unfit for basic training. With that, the unmarried mother tells the barkeep that he loathes the man that ripped out his heart and ruined his life. To this, the barkeep asks him if he thinks he could kill someone if it came down to it, and the unmarried mother sees in his eyes the same bitterness he has. Back to the story. The unmarried mother tells the barkeep that he changed his name and moved to New York after being rejected by Space Corp. He took a job as a fry cook before buying a typewriter and working as a public stenographer, which gave him the idea of becoming a confessions writer under the pen name. With that, he asks if he wins the bottle. To his surprise, the barkeep simply tells him that the story wasn't bad before asking him what he would do if he had the opportunity to kill the man who ruined his life. He proposes that he could do that for him, under the condition that he has to do his job and not the bartending one. The barkeep then tells the unmarried mother that he knows where to find the man who ruined his life. He is obviously skeptical, but is slowly convinced when the barkeep correctly deduces the name of her orphanage caretaker and his new name now as a man, John. He reluctantly follows the barkeep to the basement. When they reach the stockroom, the barkeep locks the doors, shuts, and takes the same device from earlier in the movie, the USFF Coordinates Transformer Field Kit, basically a time machine. John doesn't believe it at first, but when the barkeep activates the device, the two are transported to Cleveland, Ohio on April 3, 1963. John, still nauseous from the time jump, finds it hard to believe, but the barkeep explains everything anyway. The barkeep tells John that he's one of 11 temporal agents who prevent crime before it takes place. As he tosses John some clothes, he explains that their time disruption footprint needs to be extremely small, meaning to say that they have to keep their conversations with the people in that time period to an absolute minimum, or else the timeline will be completely screwed over and they would be killed by the Bureau. The barkeep continues and tells John that the man he's looking for is at Cleveland College, just 5 blocks away. And as a cherry on top, the barkeep also suspects that that man just might be the Fizzle Bomber, the very same guy he's been tracking since the start. John goes to Cleveland College and begins looking for the man he bumped into all those years ago, just before a woman bumps into him and asks him if he's lost. With his back still turned, he tells the woman that he was just waiting for someone, to which Jane responds with, "Well, you know what they say about those who wait." And suddenly, it clicks. John responds with the rest of the quote by Abraham Lincoln and turns around to see that the woman was Jane, him from the past. He looks at her in awe and realizes that all this time, he was the man that Jane met all those years ago. He was the same person that ruined his own life. Meanwhile, the barkeep watches all of this from the distance just before jumping to 2nd of March 1970 to stop the Fizzle Bomber. There, he catches the man setting up the bomb from the start of the movie and begins shooting at him. A gunfight ensues between them, but the bomber quickly takes him by surprise and hits him at the back of his head, knocking him to the ground. The two exchange some punches, but the bomber is able to knock him out. When he comes to, he hears the bomber shoot at someone and he witnesses himself get his face severely burned when he failed to defuse the bomb on time. As he hands the time machine back to his past self, it is revealed that all this time he was the unseen person who helps the injured man. After failing to save himself from that situation, he jumps back to the 2nd of March 1964 and goes to his apartment. After an angry fit, he cleans himself up and records a note for his past self not to exceed the number of times you can jump through time, lest there be dire consequences. Meanwhile, John spends a date with Jane. Jane is taken aback by John, who reads her and tells her that love was all she thought about, despite trying to convince herself that it doesn't matter to her. He further tells her everything she was thinking about at that moment, and the two hit it off. Back in 1964, the barkeep meets with Mr. Robertson and gives him a piece of the Fizzle Bomber's bomb. Mr. Robertson deduces that he's been making illegal jumps, which could have serious repercussions on his health. The barkeep brushes it off and tells him he's fine and will accept the consequences.
The onset of psychosis, dementia.
That Mr. Robertson tells him that his job was very important and that there are certain things that they could do more without the strict rules of the Bureau, which includes an agent from the outside with no ties to the past, present, or future. Basically someone like Jane/John. It is later revealed that it was the barkeep who stole the baby, went back to 1945 and placed the baby at the door of the orphanage. In case you missed it, Jane, John, and their baby are the same person. Quickly after this, the barkeep goes back to 24th of June 1963, the day that John leaves Jane. John sees him and realizes that it was time to go. He tells Jane he'll be right back and goes to the barkeep and points the gun at him. The barkeep explains that some things are inevitable and convinces John to leave Jane to fulfill an important mission. The two jump forward to the temporal agency in 1985, where John will take over the barkeep's job so he can retire in 1975 New York, very close to the date of the blast that killed thousands. After handing him new intel on the Fizzle Bomber, Robertson tells him that once he's reached his final destination, the time machine will decommission itself. When he gets there, he drinks the bottle that he and John were supposed to drink and decommissions the machine, or at least tries to. The decommissioning fails and he opens the envelope that Robertson gave him and finds the receipt where the Fizzle Bomber brought a part of the bomb. Attached to it is a note from Robertson himself telling him to trace the purchase order.
I guess it was inevitable.
As the barkeep goes around and prepares the next steps, he goes to an antique store and toys around with a typewriter. Meanwhile, in the background, as John is beginning his job as a temporal agent, he finds the recording made by the barkeep earlier in the movie, telling him how important their job is. Meanwhile, following Robertson's orders, he goes to the laundromat where the bomber goes to and learns that the Fizzle Bomber was actually him from the future, suffering from psychosis from all the time traveling. The Fizzle Bomber version of himself tries to convince him that what he's done was all for the better, because he would bomb places where large-scale tragedies were supposed to take place. The barkeep tells him that he would never become him, and the Fizzle Bomber tries to convince him not to kill him, because that's what he did in the past, which led him to where they are now. The barkeep doesn't listen and shoots him anyway. As he sits in his apartment wondering what the next steps will be, the recording that he left John continues, and it is revealed that he, John, Jane, and the Fizzle Bomber are all the same person.